I want to read one verse from Paul's letter to the Romans, and it's chapter 5, verse 1. Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Peace, inner peace, personal peace, whatever you want to call it, is a multi-billion-pound industry. People spend vast amounts of money on courses, on books, therapies and retreats, all with the aim of finding inner peace. And I guess we look so hard for it because it's such a rare experience. We are prospectors sifting through the gravel at the bottom of the river of our lives, hoping to find even the smallest nugget of this rare but precious thing called peace. But in the words that we've just read, the Apostle Paul is adamant that peace is something that we already possess. The challenge for us prospectors is to accept this fact. And when we do, then peace begins to spread through the whole of our lives. We're told here that we have peace through our Lord Jesus Christ. He has been raised from the dead, and this event marks the declaration of peace between God and the human race. Our Lord has been accepted by God. Our Lord has been exalted by God. The one who represents us is honored by God through being raised from the dead. This risen Jesus is the basis of our peace with God. And this verse is suggesting this peace with God forms the very core of our identity, our understanding of who we are. The fact that we are on friendly terms with God, more than that we are united to God through Christ, is the very foundation on which we build our view of ourselves, what we feel about ourselves, and how we understand our place in our world. And so at the very center of our being, there is this reality of peace with God, a reality brought about by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But, and this is a very big but, it can be hard for us to keep our focus on this astonishing fact. And what causes us to lose this focus, I want to suggest, is the difficulties in our relationships with others. Let's try to work this out a little bit more. The truth of the matter is that there are very few relationships in which we feel perfectly at peace. There are those relationships in which the absence of peace is quite obvious and fairly consistent. Personality clashes, previous unresolved conflicts or misunderstandings are usually what create these. But even in the best of our relationships, we have moments of disquiet and doubt. Worries about being loved or merely being accepted can crop up even in these good relationships from time to time. And we go through periods where we're trying to gauge how even our closest friends are evaluating us. And these feelings of discomfort and disquiet leave us with a lack of peacefulness. Anxiety and awkwardness disrupt our relationships, and even if we're not given to worrying too much about what others think about us, then there is still an absence of peace, since then our response to these relational difficulties will tend to be defiance and anger. But because, as we've just seen, our relationship with God forms the core of our identity, and because these feelings of anxiety and of rejection and disquiet are experienced by us as being really quite profound and deep-rooted, we can sometimes confuse the two. These feelings of disquiet, anxiety or resentment, this lack of peace that is the result of imperfections in our relationships with others, are wrongly attributed to our relationship with God. And suddenly we have a crisis on our hands. The very core of who we understand ourselves to be is threatened by this lack of peace. As a result, our sense of disquiet is ramped up even more. and becomes more difficult for us to tolerate. For this reason, verses like this one that talk about peace can be challenging, verses we'd prefer to avoid because we can experience them as being quite condemning of ourselves. And so let me say two further things about the peace that Paul is talking about in this verse. First of all, this peace refers to an objective state that exists between us and God. I've already really been trying to talk about this a little bit. You are at peace with God. Whether you experience the feeling of peacefulness or not doesn't affect the fact that you are at peace with God. Later on, Paul talks about Jesus dying for us while we were still enemies. And the point he's making here is that we are now no longer enemies. We are at peace. And this peace is achieved by Jesus and doesn't depend on how we feel or even on how well we live as Christians. Regardless of any of this, God is okay with us. God is okay with you. But the second point to make is that this peace that we have from God is the foundation of a flourishing life, filled with healthy and peaceful relationships, and therefore the foundation of a peaceful experience of life. You see, at the core of your identity is this vital state of peace, a peace that cannot be undone, a peace that cannot be taken away. It's already there, an objective and unchangeable reality brought about by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And rather than this core being contaminated by the disquiet associated with our everyday relationships with others, what we need to become skilled at doing is reversing that process so that our everyday relationships become touched and renewed by the peace that Jesus has established in our core. Doing this, peace will spread out from within the center of our understanding of ourselves and into our relationship with others. So how can we do this? Well, we need to spend time reflecting on the reality of the peace that we have with God through Jesus Christ. The idea here is that by doing this, we will strengthen our own conviction in this truth. You may have heard of physiotherapists or fitness gurus talking about strengthening the core. Well, this is our spiritual equivalent. Build up the resilience of your belief in your okayness with God through Jesus. And this reflecting is best done with others, in conversation, in discussion with others, and in the worship of the church. This is particularly important since it's often when we're engaged with others that our feelings are engaged with the truths that we know about God. And it's as our understanding and our feelings work in tandem that the core strength and resilience that I'm talking about is built. As you do this, your appreciation of yourself as a person loved by God will become more and more settled. It will develop greater resilience against external pressures. And as you are building up this strength, notice I'm not saying here when you build up this strength, but as you are building up this strength, your identity as a loved child of God is built and strengthened, and then you are in a better, a safer place to take risks with your relationships with others. What I mean by risk is the risk of seeking greater openness, greater intimacy with others. And frequently you will find that these risks pay off, and you will experience greater openness and intimacy in your relationships. There will, of course, be occasions when this won't happen. But because you are strengthening this core understanding of yourself, although you will feel disappointment when this happens, it won't threaten your identity. It won't threaten your peace. Over time, You will develop more rewarding relationships and become more secure in these relationships, all of which will reinforce your growing conviction that your peace starts with your peace with God, a peace that has already been established through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so we don't need to be prospectors, as though peace is a rare commodity and we need to find the tiny nuggets of it that still might be out there somewhere. But we can be gardeners, taking the seeds of peace that are in plentiful supply, planting them and watching them grow. You have peace with God, and so you can nurture peacefulness in the whole of your life.